Okay, so 2.2, we're solving absolute value equations and inequalities. Today our focus is going to be the equations. Tomorrow we will do the inequalities. So you guys likely remember that the absolute value is going to be the distance from 0 on the number line. And this is why when you take the absolute value, the result is always what? Positive. Good. Okay, now that means when you are solving the absolute value, there are two different values that can give you the positive, right? If I took the absolute value of -5, I'd get 5. But if I took the absolute value of 5, I'd get 5. So what we're going to do here is we are going to have to construct two cases. Okay, so this says for any real numbers A and B, if you have the absolute value of A equal to B, okay, then case 1 is just going to be that A is equal to B. So whatever's inside is going to be equal to whatever you have on the other side of the equation. And case 2 is very similar. Case 2 means A is equal to the opposite of that value. Okay, so it's a negative, but it also means the opposite because sometimes you start with a negative and the opposite is positive. Okay, your book really does give some nice instructions here, the step 1, step 2, 3, and 4. And so I put them there for you to follow in case you're not sure where to go. The first thing you always want to do is isolate the absolute value. Okay, so we're going to isolate the absolute value expression. Okay, so we're going to get that by itself. Okay, and then we're going to write out the two cases. It says we're going to use the properties of equality to solve each case. Properties of equality are just adding things to both sides or subtracting things to both sides, multiplying to both sides. And then this step is going to be something that we're going to work on together. So check your solutions. Okay, and we're going to put show proper steps because this is something that sometimes we have to work on. We're really good at mental math. Sometimes we have to think about slowing it down to make sure we're showing our work. Okay, now absolute value equations might have 1, 2, or no solutions. Okay, so an absolute value equation has one solution if you solve and one of the cases does not meet the criteria. Okay, when you have a solution like that, it is called an extraneous solution. Okay, an extraneous solution. So, if your solution is extraneous, it looks like a solution, but it does not satisfy the check, which is something that we're going to do. Okay, so write this down with me. Okay, so it looks like a solution, but it does not satisfy the check. Okay, so when we're checking, we're going to plug something back in. And sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not. I don't want you to go ahead of me with the check, okay? So wait for me to do that. I want to make sure we're all on the same page about that. Now, you might have one extraneous solution or you might have two. If you have multiple extraneous solutions, then you're going to end up with a no solution if there's no answer that meets the constraints of the problem. This is called the empty set, or sometimes it's called the null set. Okay, and then there's either like the empty set, or this is very common. It's just a 0 with a line through it. So when we're writing this out, the empty set, you could write that if there was no solution, or you could write no solution. Okay, so we just gone over all the rules. Now we're going to put those into practice. And then you can see I gave you a lot of room for this because I want you to make sure you're writing out your work nicely here. We have to solve the equation. Then we need to check the solutions. Okay, it's important that you're using your proper steps to check. So I've given you a few different reminders about that. So that means that's definitely going to be something we want to make sure we're doing correctly. Okay, so the first step is to isolate the absolute value. That means if you're looking at the absolute value, there is nothing in front of it or nothing behind it. There's only a value inside of it. So this already is isolated, which means we can go straight to setting up the two cases. Okay, the first case is just whatever's inside is going to equal whatever's outside. That's what A equals B means. So whatever's inside the absolute value, t minus 4, equals whatever is on the right side, which is 7t plus 12. Okay, so set that up with me. And then we're going to set up case 2. And then I'll let you solve them, okay? So for case 2, this says A equals the opposite of B. So that means whatever's inside the absolute value, t minus 4, is going to equal the opposite. And because this is, we call this a binomial, because this is 2 terms, we're going to put those terms inside parentheses. Because if you have more than one term, you are going to have to use the distributive property to simplify. Okay, and now that you have those set up, let's go ahead and solve using what we know about algebra. So I'm going to give you a moment to do that now. All right, it looks like we're doing a nice job solving for t, so let's just double check that. You can move the t's to either side. If I can avoid getting a negative in front, then I usually do that. So I'm going to minus t's from both sides, and then in the same step, I would move the 12 to the other side. You can do this in 2 steps if you want. It does not matter. Okay, but you end up with t equals negative 16 over 6. Keep in mind that you do have to reduce every fraction. So what number goes into both 16 and 6? 2. So if you divide by 2, you get negative 8 over 3. Okay, so that should be your reduced answer. So go ahead and write that down. You can say negative 2 2/3 as your value for t. When we plug it back into the check, though, it's going to be easier to keep it as an improper fraction. So I'm always going to keep it as an improper fraction, and that's generally what you'll see moving forward. Okay, and then here we're going to distribute, so we get negative 7t minus 12. So we have to apply that to both. Now, because I want to keep the t's positive, I decided to add 7 to this 1t to get 8 t's together. And then I add 4, which is going to give me negative 8. And then my last step will be to divide. Okay, so for each case I get an answer. Now I need to check that answer. And when you check that answer, there's going to be really just 2 steps we have to follow. The first step is you are going to substitute each value into the original equation. So everybody's first step is going to look the same. Okay? Everybody's first step is going to be the original equation, but with the value substituted in for t. Then we are going to simplify each side separately. And I'll explain further what I mean by that. The reason why we have to do it separately is because we can't assume both sides are equal. So we can't assume, I'm just going to write equal here instead of saying both. Okay, so we can't assume that they're equal. All right, so I'm going to keep these lined up, but you have to write your check somewhere else. Normally, I just have you guys write what your value is that you're plugging in. Okay, and when we do our check, we're going to plug it in to the original equation. So my original equation is t minus 4. So instead of t, we're going to plug in the negative 8/3. Okay, so I'm using this equation here. So negative 8/3 minus 4 is equal to 7t plus 12. Okay, so I want you to take a moment and check that your first step looks exactly like my first step. Okay, so everybody should just have the original equation where the t's are replaced with negative 8/3. Okay, and then we cannot assume these are equal. We do not know that they're equal. So I can't subtract 12 to both sides because that's a property of equality. That's why I can only work with one side at a time. Okay, so sometimes I'll just cover this other side up and I'll go from there. Okay, so if I want to subtract, then I'm going to get a common denominator. So this already has a denominator of 3. Okay, if I want 4 to have a denominator of 3, I just multiply 4 times 3, which is what? 12. Good. Okay, so 12 divided by 3 is 4, so we're good. So then, using what I know about fractions, if I do negative 8 minus 12, I have negative 20 on the top. The denominator stays the same, so we have to remember our fraction rules. Okay, and yes, we will be practicing that without our calculator. And then, when you take an absolute value, it becomes positive. Okay, so your final answer there is 20/3. Okay, so now we're going to simplify the other side, and we're going to see if we can get those to be equal. Okay, so I just covered this side up. When you are multiplying a whole number by a fraction, do you multiply the whole number by the top, by the bottom, or by both? You confident? Multiply by the top, yeah? Okay, and so you can put it over 1 like that if you need a reminder. 7 times negative 8, negative 56. Okay, turn 12 into a fraction with a denominator of 3. Okay, just write it up there. write that on your paper, and then go ahead and simplify. So we're just adding our fractions together. Okay, so to get that top number, all we have to do is multiply 12 times 3, right? So 12 times 3 is 36. What's negative 56 plus 36? Negative 20. Okay, so then I end up with 20 over 3 equals negative 20 over 3. Okay, are those the same value? Nope, one's positive, one's negative. So you're going to put the slash through it. It's not equal. Okay, so if they're not equal, this is an extraneous solution. It looked like an answer, but when we did the check, they weren't equal. Okay, so if it's extraneous, okay, do not include this in your solution. Do not include in your final answer. Okay, so if you were doing a test, you have a number line, right? You wouldn't write that on the number line. You would just have this work for it. Okay? And then we have to do that for t equals negative 1. So again, we're going to do our check. With me, Pete? Okay, so we're going to do our value minus 4 equals 7 times t plus 12. Okay, so now we have negative 1, negative 1, okay, so your first step should always look exactly like mine, where you're plugging it into the original. So make sure you have your absolute value, make sure you have this written out, okay, and then again, we'll just simplify this side first. So this is the absolute value of negative 5. The absolute value of negative 5 is 5. So we're going to see if the other side matches. So here we get negative 7 plus 12. That is 5. Okay, so if that does check, that is going to be your solution. So remember, your solution is this, not 5. Okay, it's what you plugged in. Okay, so if you were writing your answer on a line, the only thing you would write is t is equal to negative 1. Oh man, that's difficult to see. Okay, so if you were writing this on your test, the only thing you'd write on the line is t is equal to negative 1. You would have your work nicely done here, so we can see that this checks and this one does not. Okay, any questions for me so far? All right, let's try another case. Okay, now for B, this is different from part A because you do have to get the radical by itself. So you have this 3 on the outside, you have the negative on the outside, so you do need to isolate. Okay, you have to isolate the absolute value. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to subtract the 3 from both sides. When you do that, keep this negative in front. Don't lose that. Okay, and you cannot distribute that. Okay, those are not parentheses. You cannot distribute. You have to move it over using what? Division. Okay, so we're going to multiply, you could multiply each side by negative 1. Okay, or you can just divide by a negative 1. Okay, so then you get 6 plus 5r inside the absolute value equals negative 12. Okay, once you get here, now you can set up your two cases. And I usually set them up like this. Like I do my arrows, case 1 and case 2. Okay, so for this, the first case is always just whatever is inside equals whatever's on this side of the equal sign. So it's okay that it's negative. Okay, it's 6 plus 5r equals negative 12. It's the same exact equation, but without the absolute value. Your second case is going to be whatever is inside the absolute value equals the opposite. So the opposite of negative 12 is 12. Okay, so now we're going to solve each of those for r. So go ahead and do that. So make sure you're taking this time to try it. You know how to solve equations that are linear, which is what these are. A happy kiddo. I was going to say a happy Henry, but we actually have it now. All right, you guys can check to see if you got the same thing I did. Okay, so you should get negative 18 over 5. Again, we just want to leave it as in improper fraction. That's going to be the simplest when we plug it back in. And it's honestly a little less work for you because you don't have to think about how many times 5 goes into 6. Okay, so now we're going to check these. So the first one I'm going to check is negative 18/5. So when you're checking, your first step should look like everybody else's. Everybody's first step is going to look the same. So we're doing 3 minus the absolute value of 6 plus 5. And instead of r, we're going to plug in that negative 18/5. Okay, now when you're looking at this, please don't multiply by 5 and divide by 5. If you're multiplying by 5 and dividing by 5, what happens to the 5s? Yeah, they cancel, because 5 divided by 5 is, what's 5 divided by 5? 1. Okay, so those would cancel. You'd have 3 minus, and then in here, you'd have 6 minus 18. Let's see. Okay, so 6 minus 18 is going to be negative 12. When you take the absolute value, okay, this becomes 3 minus, and the absolute value of this is 12. This stays the same on the outside, okay? So then you'll have negative 9 is equal to, this just drops down. You don't have to write it every step, you can just drop it down there. And then if they're not equal, you are crossing them out. Okay, so that means this is an extraneous solution. So it's not going to be part of our final answer here. And then for checks, sometimes I just write CK. You can do the same thing. Okay, so I have 3 minus, and then I'm just looking back at my original. 6 plus 5 times r equals 15. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if you can write that out step by step. So for some of you, that's going to take some extra your mental ability to slow down because sometimes your brain is working faster than your pencil. So you're just going to have to pause and make sure you have those down. So your check is something that you're going to need to have on your homework. And on your assessments. So here, I'm fine if you just write like 6 plus 6 is going to be 12. If you want that to be your next step, you can. You could also have 6 plus 6. And then you do need to take that outside of the absolute value to show what that is. Okay, and then again, you get negative 9 is equal to 15, which isn't true. Yeah, what do we call it? Nope, if they're both extraneous, we go back here. So, yep, there's an empty set, no solution. So if there's no answer that meets it, you can either do the empty set or you can write no solution. Okay, so your solution here, you can write the 0 with the line through it. Just make sure you put the line through it, okay? The 0 would not be a correct answer. Or you can write no solution, whatever you're more comfortable with. Okay, so that means the empty set. Sometimes you're going to take a little extra time. Okay, so do you guys want to try to start C? Because you do have to isolate again. Yeah. All right, so I already saw a few people did a nice job dividing by 3. Again, do not distribute. You cannot do that. Okay, so your first step, go ahead and edit if you need to, it's okay. Okay, so we can't distribute because they're not parentheses. And so we're going to divide both sides by 3. And now we can set up the 2 cases. Okay, your first case is nice because it's the exact same thing, just without the absolute value. Your second case should have the same thing on the left side, but on this side, it's going to be the opposite. Okay, and that is one term. Okay, so if you do like negative 2w, it is just positive 2w. That is what's happening there. So now we're going to get all of our w's on one side. I can't avoid the negative here unless I want to do it in 2 steps, so I'm going to move it to one side. And then 15 and 9, do they have a common factor that goes into both? 3. So if we divide by 3, we have 5/3. It's going to stay negative. And then I can use the same steps here where I subtract 7w. Now I'm going to get negative 5w. I'm going to divide by negative 5. A positive divided by a negative is a negative. Okay, and then I'm ready to set up my checks. Okay, so checking is an important part of this process because we do have extraneous solutions. Okay, you are going to have to, well, I put R, sorry, it's W. Okay, you are going to have to remember your rules of how to combine fractions. Okay, so that's going to be a good skill that we want to come back to us here. And we're always plugging it into the original. So it's 3, and then in the absolute value, 7 times negative 5/3 plus 15, close your absolute value, negative 7 times negative 5/3. All right, so I'm just going to cover up this side. So all I have to do is work on this at first. You need to start inside because this is your order of operations. Okay, so if I multiply, I'm going to get negative 35 over 3 plus and then remember, to get the numerator, you just have to multiply 15 times 3. Okay, or you can just add 15 3 times, right? 15 plus 15 is 30, 30 plus 15, 45. Yep. You guys with me? Good. And then we're going to keep this 3 on the outside. Okay, so now that I have a common denominator, negative 35 plus 45 is, yep, so just 10/3. And then when you take the absolute value, it is just going to be this. And then the 3's are going to cancel. Okay, so you have 10. You can cancel this out. Okay, and then when you're on this side, you actually have a few different options. So one thing you can do is you can think of this as over 1. What's negative 6 times negative 5? 30, yeah. So if you have 30 over 3, what does that reduce to? 10. Yay. Okay, you could also, some of you may have recognized, oh, 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. So you could do negative 2 times negative 5 in this step. And again, you would have got 10. Let's try to keep a good attitude even when things are hard. Okay, I'm going to let you try to plug that in. It's okay. I know. All right, so you can check your first step to make sure it looks like my first step. And then you have negative 21 plus 15, okay, which is going to be a negative 6. When you take that out of the parentheses, when you take that out of the absolute value, though, we're going to put it in parentheses. So the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. So when we multiply those together, we get 18. Okay, so negative 21 plus 15, I'm even okay if you go like from here to the negative 6, but I need to see this. I need to see the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. Okay. Oh, and some of you may have just went and did this side first. That's fine, right? Because that's just 18. All right, so remember, one of the possible solutions is you could have two solutions. If you have two solutions, again, make sure that you don't write 10 and 18. That's not the solution. It's what you plugged in. So your solution is W equals -5/3 or W equals -3. Okay, so what you're gonna do tonight, well, this day one, you're gonna start the homework. You can do numbers 2 through 8. I have to look at the page number, and I'm gonna put it up there for you.
That's still too many questions.
2 through 8. No comments necessary at this time. Tissues are in the back if you need to cry about it. Page 89. Okay, so page 89, numbers 2 through 8.